I do like simplicity. Someone said this the other day, and I thought, it was like, oh yeah, of course, this is how I think. And it's like, it was Corey from the God of War team. I just met him over the PlayStation Expo, and then his quote was, simple stories, complex characters. And yes, that's how it should be. I hate games that have all this extra exposition that's unnecessary, and I love exploring complex relationships. That's always what I strive for. What's the right amount of exposition, and how do you layer that exposition with some character revelation so it doesn't feel like just pure exposition? That's very difficult writing.
The hard part in writing dialogue is making it sound natural, right? Particularly in the Uncharted series, where you're having to explain a lot of the historical background behind what this treasure is that they're after, or like things that may or may not have happened between the characters. You know, you don't ever want somebody to say like, hey Drake, I'm still mad at you for that thing you did to me 5 years ago, right? You want to show it in other ways. You never want to hit the nail on the head with that stuff.
Those are the hardest scenes. There's some personal conflict scenes where characters don't agree with each other that in some ways come easier for me, but the expositional stuff is the hardest, because if it's just that, then to me it's a bad scene. If it's just someone just spouting historical facts, then I might as well just read Wikipedia. But if someone can argue about a fact, or that fact means something to them on a personal level, or it kind of sets two characters against each other, then all of a sudden the information becomes a lot more relevant, a lot more compelling. So there's a lot of interesting character dynamics that's happening while we're sneaking in a lot of information that you need to follow the plot of the story. I need to understand why the character cares. I don't necessarily need to understand what that MacGuffin is or how it operates, but I want to know why he cares. Why is he so invested? Why is he obsessed with this idea? And I guess all the games I've worked on have dealt with obsession on some level or another. Like if you think about Drake and all these people he's surrounded with are obsessed with this idea of treasure. Joel becomes obsessed with protecting Ellie. Ellie is obsessed with this idea of justifying her friend's death. Jack X, who knows what was happening in Jack X. I love the elegance of the story in Uncharted 1, the simplicity of it, and what it was personally for Nathan Drake, the kind of personal journey that he had of finding out who he is and what he kind of stands for. I love the complexity of Uncharted 2, of like how you have these two women that represents two different sides of his character, pulling him in these two directions, and again finding out another facet of his character. And Uncharted 3 started exploring this concept of that you can't have it both ways. You can't have the adventure life and settle down and be with the person that you love. When you have really interesting complex characters and they have their objectives, they have something that they want, and they can't both get what they want, so it's going to come to a head at some point. I love setting that up and then reaching that kind of boiling point, and then that's when you get to see who the characters really are, like what really defines them. Well, the first thing Bruce and I did when we came on the project is flesh out an entire outline, so we know the beginning, middle, and end, because we feel like that's very important to understand where we're heading. Otherwise, I don't know how to make a decision. So as the level gets fleshed out, we know what this level has this kind of mini arc for the characters. So here's how they start, here's how they end, and then I'll work with Bruce and another designer when we get, so we kind of like zoom in on that and then figure out the moment-to-moment beats of that level. Okay, what are these mini arcs that's happening to build towards this bigger change?
Neil's just got a fantastic sense of story and character development in general. And I think Neil's really good with like structure and scene structure and making the scene flow in a more natural progression. And he's also particularly good at like problem solving. Like, if something doesn't seem to be working, he can sort of take a step back and look at it and really maybe try to come up with things from a different angle.
We always start from the middle and work our way out, because the middle is kind of your core gameplay. That's what your game is really about, and also that's what your story is really about. This is like the fun games, like the promise we make you in the beginning. Here's the payoff of it before we get into like, okay, well, here's the climax of it. And then once we figure all that out, we understand who the characters are, then we can work our way towards the ending of how they're going to change, how they're going to evolve. And then the beginning is really hard in the game because that's where you do all your training. So until you have all your mechanics figured out, you can't really get too much into the beginning, because that trains how you do everything. So that's usually the last thing that's done, is the very beginning. There's writing and there's storytelling. So writing is just a small aspect of storytelling. And when, a lot of times when we're putting something together, it's hard to tell whether the storytelling is working because it requires good writing, but good music, good performances. If there's problems with the gameplay beforehand or afterwards, and people might be reacting and say, you know what, that beat didn't really work. But it's not necessarily because of the writing. It could be because of something else, or it could be because of the writing. So you really have to kind of gain experience and learn how to discern that and say, well, I know they said this character moment didn't really work, but I still have faith that it can work once we get these other aspects in, so let's not change it quite yet.
So what do you think people don't understand or appreciate about storytelling in games?
Just how difficult it can be to like have a vision for a story and to say, okay, this story is trying to say this very specific kind of message. And then to make sure you constantly come back to that and don't take shortcuts. And when you hit a wall, sometimes it's so easy to say, it's just a game. You can just hide it, and we'll just have some explosion and get away with it. To say, no, this moment is really important, and like let's make it work, and let's work really hard to make it work. And an example for that is like getting the relationship between Ellie and Riley right, and The Last of Us Left Behind took so much iteration on writing, and there's like a ton of dialogue we recorded that just did not work, and a lot of it was on the writing. The writing just wasn't up to par, and it required another full pass, almost redefining Riley's character and that relationship with Ellie to get it right. So what might seem like a simple line when you're finally playing the game, there could have been 100 other lines and 100 different versions before we got to that very simple line.
So why don't you like writing jokes?
I'm just not good at it. I would love to do it. I just can't.
It's gonna be tough working on an Uncharted game if you can't write some
That's
quips.
why I have Josh. Josh is the funny one.
The way I think of it is this: in the sensibility spectrum, you have dark and you have light. I'd say Neil tends a little bit more towards the dark side, and I tend a little bit more towards the light side. He likes to joke when he's like going through my scripts that he's gonna he's going to say like, okay, I'm just going to look at this, cut a few jokes, and give it back to you. And I joke when he gives me his scripts, I'm going to look at it and say, okay, I'm going to look at this and like cut out all the references to blood and death and give it back to you. So, we have a lot of fun.
You just want to make sure it all feels natural. It feels honest. It never feels forced. We always write and record more than we'll need. So we have like, even for this demo, there's like 20 or 30 more quips that Drake makes on just like when he's climbing the piton wall, and we just pick one. But it's having those choices and knowing when, okay, this should be a quiet moment. We don't need anything here. But then, okay, here's something Drake would comment on. And also understanding where that comes from Drake, which is a defense mechanism. So when he gets scared or when he gets stressed, more of those quips come out. And that's how he makes himself feel better about the situation he's in. And that, for me, helps justify, and I understand the motivation versus, so the motivation is just, let's make the player laugh here. It's like, no, the motivation is Drake needs to calm himself down.
Writing jokes is fun, but you can go overboard with that stuff too. So the important thing is like, where does this actually work, and where is this actually thematically correct? Where does this work with the characters? Because if it's just people tossing off jokes randomly all the time, then that just gets really old and silly. He's somewhat world weary and seen a lot of this stuff before, so a lot of it is just his incredulous reactions to all the crazy stuff that's happening around him, right? That's one type of humor, and that's one thing that Nolan often brings to the voice recording sessions.
I swear to God, if there's a zombie around the next corner.
Because what we actually do is, we write stuff for him, but then we also record somebody playing the game, and we play that back for Nolan, and he watches it, and he just gives us these off-the-cuff responses to what he's seeing. So a lot of the stuff that you saw in the demo was, in fact, some of that stuff that we wrote, and some of it's just stuff that Nolan came up with on the spot when we were doing the voice recording.
Are you trying to climb up there? In those boots?
And it works well together, because he comes up with stuff that we wouldn't have thought of, and that then informs his character.
You got it.
Okay.
You got it?
Yep.
I will say most of those like little things, those are straight from the actors. And so much of that is the process that we've developed here at Naughty Dog, which is making the actors feel comfortable to experiment, to try things. A lot of studios don't do this, but when we do VO for in-game dialogue, we put the actors in the booth together so they can riff off each other, and we really encourage them to do that. Or if there's a moment where they're pushing a crate, it's like, well, if we can, and we can get them both on the mocap stage, let's have them actually push the crate and give them a topic to talk about, and just do it a bunch of times and have them try different ways of doing that. And if we want them to feel frustrated, and you do it a few extra times, so the actors are feeling a little frustrated, and you're trying to get some of that energy to like get infused into the characters.
Do you feel like it helps to bring in fresh writing blood with Josh?
Absolutely, and it's a learning experience for me, because on The Last of Us, except for some enemy banter and some notes, I had to write everything myself, and it's kind of refreshing to be able to bounce off Josh and Tom and iterate with them, and it kind of just takes that weight off of me. And yeah, it's cool. I like it.
I'm having a great time. It's a real challenge, and every day I come in and I am inspired by what all my coworkers are doing with the environments, with the animation, and with everything that they're sort of creating around it. So it's up to me and Neil and Tom to craft a story and characters that's worthy of all the hard work that everybody else is putting into it, right? So it's a big challenge and a big responsibility.
Trying to find closure for Nathan Drake, honoring the first 3 titles while still evolving them. I feel like we're finding that balance, and I hope fans appreciate the payoff.